Late April 1945, somewhere east of the Elbe River in Germany, a lone jeep idled on a dusty road. Its engine rumbled softly beneath the weight of silence that stretched across a landscape shattered by war. Captain Thomas Moffatt Burriss, a young paratrooper from South Carolina, sat behind the wheel, his fingers gripping the steering column so tightly that the grime-covered skin of his knuckles turned white. For 6 days, he and his men had fought through a collapsing Germany, and now, through the dusty windshield, Burriss stared at something that seemed impossible. A column of German vehicles stretching endlessly ahead. Behind him sat his lieutenant and sergeant, weapons ready, though both knew their rifles were useless against what lay ahead. Before them stood 15,000 German soldiers of an armored panzer corps, tanks, artillery, machine guns, an army that could obliterate them in seconds. Yet, what unfolded in the next half hour would defy every law of logic and war. Without a single shot fired, the entire German force would surrender to Burriss and his 2 men. It wasn't due to overwhelming firepower or tactical genius. It was the triumph of audacity, a single man's calculated bluff, and the broken psyche of an army caught between 2 superpowers. Thomas Moffatt, Burriss's story began far from the battlefields of Europe, in the quiet mill towns of South Carolina. Born in Anderson on September 22, 1919, he grew up surrounded by the rhythm of factory whistles and the dignity of hard labor. After graduating from Clemson University, he became a high school teacher in Orangeburg, a mild-mannered young man with no interest in fighting, more comfortable with chalk than a rifle. But when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Burriss's life changed forever. By January, the quiet teacher was now a soldier, his reserve officer commission suddenly active. Yet, Burriss wasn't content to march with ordinary infantry. He volunteered for the paratroopers, men who dropped behind enemy lines into the jaws of chaos. The training was punishing, designed to break both body and spirit. Many washed out, but Burriss thrived. He discovered in himself a steel he never knew existed, a calm under fire and a boldness that would define his destiny. In April 1942, Burriss became one of the first officers assigned to the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the newly formed 82nd Airborne Division, famously known as the All-Americans. Soldiers from every corner of the United States, farmers, dock workers, mechanics, and cowboys, trained beside him. Together they became the soldiers that German officers would come to fear and call devils in baggy pants. The name came from a diary, found on a fallen German soldier who wrote, in awe and terror of the Americans who were never more dangerous than when surrounded. Burriss and his men lived up to that reputation time and again. Their first jump came in July 1943 over Sicily, under a sky shredded with flak and tracer fire. Burriss led his men through darkness, scattered across the countryside, fighting their way to their objectives. Months later, in Italy, he guided his company through the beaches of Salerno. 5 days of hellish combat, outnumbered and outgunned, but never broken. The experience hardened him, preparing him for the horrors yet to come. Anzio, January 1944. The beachhead became a nightmare. Months of shelling and death in the mud. Burriss was wounded twice, refused evacuation both times, and learned that courage wasn't about glory. It was about endurance, about keeping men alive when the world collapsed around them. Then came the operation that would test his soul. Market Garden, September 1944. The Allies hoped to end the war by Christmas. Burriss's regiment was ordered to seize a bridge over the Waal River at Nijmegen, a mission so dangerous it was called suicide. Under artillery and machine gun fire, Burriss and his men crossed the river in flimsy canvas boats, paddling with rifle butts when their oars were lost. Half were killed or wounded before they reached the opposite shore. Burriss's boat took a direct hit, killing his engineer beside him and covering him in blood. Yet he pressed on, storming German trenches and taking the bridge. He succeeded, but what came after taught him the limits of valor. When British tanks arrived to reinforce the bridge, they refused to advance, halted by a single German gun. Burriss, furious and exhausted, confronted the British commander, demanding he move forward. The argument became legendary, a clash of caution and courage. The British held their ground, and the operation ultimately failed. Burriss was awarded the Silver Star, but he knew bravery alone didn't win wars. Sometimes it took boldness, a willingness to defy logic itself. Through the winter of 1944, the 82nd Airborne faced the fury of Hitler's final counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge. They fought in snow and ice, low on food, freezing in foxholes, yet holding the line against German tanks. When the smoke cleared, the tide of war turned for good. By spring 1945, Germany was collapsing. Burriss and his men pressed east, liberating towns and camps. In early May, they entered the Wöblin concentration camp near Ludwigslust, and what they saw there would scar them forever. Thousands of corpses, starved prisoners barely alive, evidence of unimaginable cruelty. Hardened paratroopers vomited, wept, and raged. Burriss shot open the gate, freeing the few survivors and forcing nearby German civilians to witness what their regime had done. The memory of that place, he would later say, was worse than any battle. Then came the order that would set the stage for Burriss's most audacious act. By late April 1945, Eisenhower had commanded Allied forces to halt at the Elbe River. Berlin was to be left for the advancing Soviets. The war was effectively over for the Americans, but for Burriss, sitting idle was unbearable. He'd been fighting for nearly 3 years. He wasn't built to wait. So one morning, restless and defiant, he turned to his lieutenant and sergeant and said, "Let's go see what's across the river." What followed was one of the most daring moments in modern warfare. Driving deep into enemy territory, the three Americans soon encountered something incredible. An entire German armored corps in retreat, tens of thousands of soldiers, tanks, and artillery. By every rule of combat, they should have turned back. But Burriss didn't. Instead, he ordered the jeep forward. He approached the lead German officer, a captain who spoke English. Stepping out with the casual confidence of a man backed by an unseen army, Burriss declared, "I am here to accept your surrender." The German officer stared at him in disbelief. "3 men in a jeep?" he asked. Burriss didn't flinch. "I have an entire army of paratroopers behind me," he said evenly. "And the Russians are right behind you. Do you want to surrender to us or to them?" That bluff, uttered with perfect calm, changed everything. The German officer hesitated, then conferred with his men. Minutes passed. Finally, he returned, drew his pistol, not to fire, but to hand it over, grip first. One by one, German soldiers laid down their arms. 15,000 men surrendered to 3. Burriss had a new problem. What to do with them? He had no radio, no orders, and no manpower to guard prisoners. So he ordered the German officers to march their men west toward American lines, while his jeep followed behind. As the enormous column moved, stunned American patrols watched, unsure what to make of it. The news spread like wildfire. Captain Burriss had captured a panzer corps without firing a shot. At division headquarters, his superiors were furious and astonished in equal measure. He had disobeyed orders, risked his men, and somehow won. In the end, he was commended, not court-martialed. Even Eisenhower's staff heard the story. Historians would later call it one of the greatest bluffs of the war. After the guns fell silent, Burriss returned home to South Carolina, a decorated hero, Silver Star, 3 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and the respect of every man who had served under him. But he never boasted. Instead, he built a quiet life, married, raised a family, and founded Burriss Construction Company with his sons. He brought the same integrity to business and politics that had guided him through war: direct, fearless, honest. As a state legislator, he became South Carolina's first Republican minority leader, helping shape modern politics in the region. Yet, even in peacetime, the memories of war never left him. When Hollywood made A Bridge Too Far in 1977, Burriss served as a consultant, watching actors reenact the Waal River crossing that had nearly killed him. Decades later, he wrote his memoir, Strike and Hold, to finally confront those ghosts. Even in his 70s and 80s, Burriss continued to jump from airplanes, revisiting battlefields in Holland, honored by the Queen of the Netherlands for his role in their liberation. To the end of his life, he spoke of leadership, not as theory, but as survival. "Good leaders lead from the front," he said. "Never ask your men to do something you wouldn't do yourself." When he passed away in 2019 at age 99, veterans, politicians, and Dutch citizens came together to honor him. South Carolina's governor called him one of the finest leaders our nation ever produced, Captain Thomas Moffatt. Burriss's story is more than a tale of war. It is a study in courage, psychology, and leadership. He proved that strength isn't always measured in numbers or firepower. Sometimes it's measured in nerve, in the quiet confidence of one man who dares to act when others freeze. In April 1945, a young paratrooper from South Carolina faced 15,000 enemy soldiers and made them surrender with nothing but his will. In doing so, he showed that even in the darkest moments of history, a single act of courage can illuminate the power of the human spirit.